powerhouse first set foot on the moon said that what it had demonstrated was that mankind's opportunities were unlimited. Lawrence McGuinty reports.
Apollo astronauts reunited 30 years after the moon landing. Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon, and Neil Armstrong, the first, who said we should go back to the moon.
In my own view, the important achievement of Apollo was a demonstration that humanity is not forever chained to this planet, and our visions go rather further than that, and our opportunities are unlimited.
3 decades ago, 3 men, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins, began the greatest adventure ever. Saturn V was the biggest rocket NASA ever built.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
In the race against the Russians, NASA spent $24 billion to put Apollo 11 into space. When they reached the moon, the lander, called the Eagle, inched down to the lunar surface, with fuel running dangerously short.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
And Neil Armstrong made that historic step forward.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
5 other Apollo missions came to the moon, bringing space buggies that allowed astronauts to range over the lunar surface before they blasted off back to Earth.
3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston.
Lawrence McGuinty, ITN.
The daughter of a chief constable who assaulted 2 officers in her father's force was sentenced to 150 hours community service. Frances Whitehouse, who's 18, punched and kicked 2 officers in the Sussex force after drinking several pints of strong cider. Whitehouse was also ordered to pay £650 in compensation and costs. There have been more anti-Milosevic rallies in the former Yugoslavia. Last night, about 8,000 people gathered in Kraljevo to attend a rally organised by the Alliance for Change. They heard Zoran Djindjic, leader of the opposition Democratic Party, say Milosevic has nowhere to run. Elsewhere, 4 more town councils in Serbia passed resolutions calling on Milosevic to resign, bringing the total number to do so to 11. Serbs and Albanians have sat down in Kosovo at the first meeting of the UN-sponsored Transitional Council. It was said to have been businesslike. As ITN's Joe Andrews reports, one of Kosovo's most pressing problems is unexploded bombs, and they're going to need outside help with that for a long time.
Unexploded NATO cluster bombs being safely detonated by British troops at Podejevo airfield in Kosovo. This is priority work for all the forces here at present. During the 11-week war, NATO planes dropped around 25,000 bombs. No one knows how many failed to explode, but since the peacekeeping force arrived, British soldiers and ethnic Albanians have been killed by devices exactly like this. Getting rid of them safely is a risky and painstaking process, but at least the soldiers understand the devices they're dealing with. Other teams contracted to clear Serb-laid booby traps and mines from homes and streets are working in the dark. They simply don't know what they will find.
Have they been inside this building? He said that he was.
Tony Thompson's team have been called to a family who returned from a refugee camp to discover that their home had been used as a Serb police command post with 2 bunkers dug in the garden. They think the garden shed may be dangerous.
He's quite right to think that they've mined or booby-trapped. It's the done thing when people like the Serbs leave. They've done that in Bosnia and they'll do it here.
His team carefully sift through everything in the shed, using hooks and cables to pull away items they're not sure about. The building is finally given the all clear and one family can return home in safety. But the threat from mines and munitions lies everywhere throughout Kosovo, in even the most tranquil of places. The war here was over in a matter of weeks, but problems like the unexploded cluster bombs in this field, booby traps and mines will last for years, and every Kosovar will have to live with the possibility of being injured or killed for a long time to come. Joe Andrews, ITN, Prizren.
Time now for a look at what stories are making the headlines in this morning's papers. It exists. Only last week, a couple in New York City were accused of forcing a young Nigerian girl to work for them for almost a decade against her will. In France, a wealthy couple have just been tried for the same offence. Tom Hill reports.
In France, this young girl from Togo in West Africa became a virtual prisoner of her employers.
C'est comme ça, pas d'argent, pas de...
It was like that. No money, no identity papers, no school as I had been promised. I had no right to eat until the rest of the family had finished. I was not allowed to go out. I had to stay in the house. I had no weekends, no friends. I wasn't allowed to invite anyone in the home. You had to stay in the kitchen. You couldn't even go into the lounge to watch television.
Henriette lived for 4 years in the home of wealthy French publisher Vincent Bardet and his wife. Without a passport and in a strange land, Henriette lived in fear of the couple and in fear of the police, who she thought might deport her.
La femme, elle, tout le temps avec les mots d'insulte, tu es moche, tu es vilain, tu es sorcière.
The wife insulted me all the time. She said, "You are ugly, you're a villain, a witch. You haven't done this or that work. If you go out and talk to anyone, I'll call the police, and because you do not have the right documents, they'll take you back home."
Her only comfort came from the 4 children she looked after.
Oh, les enfants, ils sont adorables. Et parfois, je pleure parce que elle me dit des choses.
The children were lovely. Sometimes they said things to me that made me sad and I cried. What have I done to deserve this? But when they found me crying, they would say, "Don't cry. When I've got lots of money, I'll give it to you and you can live away from my mother." It was because of the children that I didn't go crazy or try to kill myself.
Eventually, she found the strength to look for help.
Something happened and I realized that I needed to leave and give some purpose to my life. And anyway, I had nothing to lose. Either I die or I go home. It doesn't matter. I took a decision. I had to get out.
With the help of the Committee Against Modern Slavery, Henriette has since taken her captors to court in a highly publicised case in Paris. While they were not convicted of slavery, the Bardets were sentenced to 5 months in prison in order to pay Henriette $16,000 in damages.
The sentences are symbolic but real. They will strike at public opinion. There's 3 years with no civil or family rights and the publication of the decision in national newspapers to show that these things should never happen again.
Henriette's story is not unique and is certainly not limited to Europe. Abuse of domestic workers is a grave problem around the world.
It's monstrous that at the end of the 20th century, children in Africa are being sold as slaves. So let's stop talking about slavery 2 centuries ago, because it's still happening today.
In Kenya, this 16-year-old girl who was earning just $10 a month was raped by her boss in Nairobi. According to Kenya's Women's Rights Awareness Program, young girls who are employed as domestic workers are particularly vulnerable to such abuse.
I think it is just an issue of neglect, because if the government could do something to make sure that children's rights are respected, then they would not be abused. Then secondly, I think it is the issue of a lack of employment, because most of these domestic workers come from poor families.
Now, pressure groups in Kenya are demanding national legislation to outlaw child domestic workers and so protect them from abuse. They also want a solid commitment from the international community to put an end to slavery around the world.
Animal rights activists are due to march through